For 4 days, 900 U.S. Navy sailors were hunted by sharks in the Pacific Ocean, and nobody even knew they were missing. They had just delivered the atomic bomb and completed the most secret mission of the war. This is the horrifying true story of the USS Indianapolis, the ship the Navy forgot, and the captain they blamed for their own catastrophic mistake. July 30th, 1945. Just after midnight. The USS Indianapolis is cruising through the Philippine Sea. It's pitch black. No moon. The heavy cruiser is sailing alone, which is unusual. Big ships don't usually travel without escorts. But the Indianapolis is on a secret mission. They just delivered the most important cargo of World War II. Components for the atomic bomb that will be dropped on Hiroshima in 6 days. The mission was so classified that most of the 1,196 men on board had no idea what they were carrying. Now they're heading to the Philippines to prepare for the invasion of Japan. Captain Charles McVay is in his cabin. Most of the crew is asleep. Everything seems routine. Then, at 12:14 a.m., 2 Japanese torpedoes slam into the starboard side. The ship lurches violently. Men are thrown from their bunks. The lights go out. Water is flooding in. The Indianapolis is sinking. In 12 minutes, she'll be gone. About 300 men will go down with the ship. The other 900 will be left floating in the ocean, wearing life jackets, clinging to debris, trying not to drown. And here's the terrifying part. Nobody knows they're there. The Navy doesn't know the ship was torpedoed. Nobody's coming to rescue them. For 4 days, these men will float in shark-infested waters, dying from dehydration, exposure, and the worst mass shark attack in human history. Only 316 will survive. And when it's all over, the Navy will court-martial the captain for losing his ship, making him the only captain in U.S. naval history to be tried for losing a vessel in combat. This is the story of the USS Indianapolis, the ship that delivered the atomic bomb, the ship that sank in 12 minutes, the ship the Navy forgot. Let's start 3 weeks earlier, July 16th, 1945. The USS Indianapolis is at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California. The ship has been in combat for most of the war. She's taken kamikaze hits. She's been damaged. She's been repaired. The crew is experienced. Captain McVay has commanded her since November 1944. He's a 4th-generation Navy officer. His father was an admiral. McVay knows ships. He's competent, professional, respected by his crew. On July 16th, a mysterious cargo arrives at the dock under heavy guard. Wooden crates, a large metal cylinder, armed guards everywhere. Nobody's explaining what this is. Captain McVay is told to load the cargo and prepare to depart immediately. His orders are classified. He's to sail to Tinian Island in the Pacific as fast as possible. Top speed, no delays. The cargo must be delivered by July 26th. That's all he's told. The rest is above his security clearance. The cargo is loaded into the ship's hangar. The metal cylinder, about 15 feet long and 5 feet in diameter, is welded to the deck so it can't shift during rough seas. Whatever this is, it's incredibly important. The crew speculates. Some think it's poison gas for use against Japan. Others think it's biological weapons. Some guess it's components for a new type of bomb. None of them know they're carrying parts of Little Boy, the atomic bomb that will destroy Hiroshima. July 16th, late evening. The Indianapolis departs Mare Island. She heads west at 29 knots. That's fast for a heavy cruiser. Normally ships cruise at 15 to 20 knots to save fuel. But McVay has orders to hurry. The voyage takes 10 days. On July 26th, the Indianapolis arrives at Tinian. The mysterious cargo is immediately unloaded by a personnel who don't identify themselves. McVay is told his mission is complete. He's to proceed to Guam for minor repairs, then continue to the Philippines to prepare for the invasion of Japan, scheduled for November. The Indianapolis arrives at Guam on July 27th. Minor repairs are conducted. The crew gets shore leave. Some rest. On July 28th, McVay reports to the port director's office to receive his sailing orders. He's told to proceed to Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. He asks about escort ships. Normally, vessels traveling in potentially hostile waters have destroyer escorts for protection, but the port director tells him no escorts are available. The Indianapolis will sail alone. McVay asks about the threat assessment. Are there Japanese submarines in the area he'll be transiting? He's told the route is relatively safe. There have been no confirmed submarine sightings recently. What McVay isn't told is that this is a lie. Intelligence has detected Japanese submarine activity in the area. The I-58, a Japanese submarine, is known to be operating along the route McVay will take. But this intelligence isn't shared with him. Someone decides he doesn't need to know. This decision will kill 880 men. McVay also asks about zigzagging. Zigzagging is a defensive tactic where ships constantly change course in irregular patterns. It makes them harder targets for submarines because calculating an intercept is nearly impossible if the target keeps changing direction. The orders state that zigzagging is at the captain's discretion based on visibility and conditions. If it's good visibility, he should zigzag. If visibility is poor, it's optional. The night of July 30th will have poor visibility. No moon. Overcast. McVay will decide not to zigzag. This decision will be used against him at his court-martial. July 28th, late afternoon. The Indianapolis departs Guam. She's sailing alone. No escorts. No destroyer screen. Just a heavy cruiser crossing potentially hostile waters by herself. This is unusual. The Navy has lost multiple ships to submarines in this area, but orders are orders. McVay sets course for Leyte Gulf. The voyage should take about 4 days. The crew settles into routine. Watch rotations, meals, maintenance. Some men write letters home. The war is almost over. Germany surrendered in May. Japan is clearly beaten. Everyone thinks they'll be home by Christmas. Some are planning what they'll do after discharge. College, jobs, marriage, normal life after years of war. None of them know they have less than 48 hours to live. July 29th passes uneventfully. The ship makes good progress. The weather is decent. Seas are moderate. Everything is routine. That night, July 29th into July 30th, the crew not on watch goes to sleep. About 600 men are asleep in their bunks. Another 200 or so are on duty. The rest are scattered around the ship, reading, playing cards, writing letters. Meanwhile, the I-58, commanded by Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto, is patrolling the area. Hashimoto is hunting. He's already sunk one American destroyer earlier in the war. Now he's looking for another target. At around 11:30 p.m. on July 29th, a lookout on the I-58 spots something on the horizon. A ship. Traveling alone. Hashimoto moves to intercept. He maneuvers the I-58 into attack position. The ship is making it easy. She's not zigzagging. She's on a straight course at steady speed. It's a perfect torpedo solution. Hashimoto orders 6 torpedoes loaded. He's not taking chances. He's going to fire multiple torpedoes to ensure hits. Just after midnight on July 30th, Hashimoto gives the order. Fire! 6 torpedoes launch from the I-58. They streak through the water toward the Indianapolis. Hashimoto watches through his periscope. The torpedoes are running true. The target hasn't detected them. She's not taking evasive action. The torpedoes close the distance. Then, impact. 12:14 a.m., July 30th, 1945. 2 torpedoes hit the Indianapolis. The first hits the bow on the starboard side. The explosion is massive. The entire bow is blown off. The second torpedo hits farther back, near a fuel tank and ammunition magazine. This explosion is even bigger. Fires erupt. The ship lurches violently to starboard. The power goes out. Emergency lighting flickers on, but it's barely enough to see. Captain McVay is thrown from his bunk by the explosions. He runs to the bridge in his nightclothes. He's trying to assess the damage, but communications are out. The internal phone system is dead. He can't reach different parts of the ship. He sends runners to check damage, but the ship is listing heavily to starboard and sinking by the bow. Water is flooding in at an incredible rate. Below decks, it's chaos. Men are trapped in compartments that are flooding. The explosions destroyed watertight doors. Water is rushing through the ship. Men are trying to escape, but many of them are trapped below the waterline. Some are injured from the explosions. Others are disoriented in the darkness. The ship is sinking so fast that many don't have time to reach escape routes. About 300 men are going to die in the next few minutes, trapped below decks as the ship goes down. Those who can reach the deck face a different nightmare. The ship is listing so heavily that the starboard side is almost underwater. The deck is at a 45-degree angle. Men are sliding toward the water. Life rafts should be deployed, but there's no time and no coordination. Some rafts are launched, many aren't. The ship is sinking too fast. McVay realizes the ship is doomed. She's going down. The bow is underwater. The stern is rising out of the ocean. He needs to give the order to abandon ship. But the communication system is destroyed. He can't reach the crew. He tells the officers on the bridge to pass the word. Abandon ship. Every man for himself. But many crew members never get the message. They're trapped below. Or they're in parts of the ship where nobody can reach them. Or they're unconscious from the explosions. The abandon ship order reaches maybe half the crew. The rest are on their own. Men start jumping into the water. Some have life jackets. Some don't. Some grab floating debris. Others just swim away from the sinking ship. The water is warm, about 85 degrees. That's good. Hypothermia won't be an immediate problem. But there are other problems. The ship is sinking and creating suction. Men need to swim away quickly or they'll be pulled under. Some don't make it far enough. They're dragged down as the ship goes under. 12 minutes after the torpedoes hit, the USS Indianapolis sinks. The bow goes under first. The stern rises high into the air. Men on the stern have to climb upward as the deck becomes vertical. Then the whole ship slides beneath the waves. The suction pulls down anyone too close. The ship disappears into 3,500 feet of water. It's 12:26 a.m., 12 minutes from torpedoes to sinking. One of the fastest sinkings of a large warship in naval history. About 900 men are now in the water. Some are in rafts. Most are just floating in life jackets or clinging to debris. It's dark. They can't see each other clearly. They're calling out, trying to find friends and shipmates. Gradually, groups form. Men swim toward voices. They find each other and cluster together. Being alone in the ocean at night is terrifying. Being with others provides some comfort, even if the situation is hopeless. But here's the crucial thing. Nobody knows they're there. The Indianapolis was traveling under radio silence. She wasn't sending position reports. When she was torpedoed, she sent no distress signal. The radio room was destroyed in the explosions. Even if they'd wanted to send an SOS, they couldn't. The ship sank before any distress call went out. As far as the Navy knows, The Indianapolis is still sailing toward Later Gulf. Nobody knows she's been sunk. The survivors don't know this yet. They assume someone saw the explosions, or picked up a distress signal, or noticed the ship is missing. They think rescue will come soon, maybe by morning, definitely within 24 hours. So they focus on staying alive until help arrives. They form groups. They try to stay together. Some are injured. Others are burned from the fires. They help each other as much as they can. They're floating in their life jackets, waiting for dawn. As the sun rises on July 30th, the survivors can finally see each other. There are hundreds of men scattered across miles of ocean, small groups everywhere, a few rafts with maybe 10 to 20 men each, but mostly just men in life jackets floating. The ocean looks calm. Clear blue water, beautiful sunrise. But this ocean is full of sharks. Oceanic sac white-tip sharks. They're attracted to the area by the blood from injured men, by the splashing and noise, by the distress signals that wounded fish give off. Except these aren't fish. These are men. And the sharks don't care. The first shark attacks probably begin on the first day. Most accounts say the sharks started showing up within hours. Men spot fins circling. Someone screams. Then another scream. A man disappears underwater. He doesn't come back up. The others watch in horror. They're defenseless. They can't fight sharks. They can't outswim them. All they can do is stay in groups and hope the sharks go after someone else. It's a horrifying lottery. Every attack means someone dies, and nobody knows when the next attack will come. By the end of the first day, men are getting thirsty. They've been in the water for about 12 hours. They're dehydrated from the sun and the salt water spray. Some men are tempted to drink seawater. Others warn them not to. Drinking seawater causes salt poisoning. It makes you more dehydrated. It makes you hallucinate. But the thirst is overwhelming. Some men drink anyway. They start hallucinating within hours, seeing things that aren't there, believing rescue ships are coming, swimming away from the group toward imaginary vessels. Once they separate from the group, the sharks get them. Night falls on July 30th, 24 hours since the sinking. The survivors have been in the water for a full day. No rescue has come. Some are starting to worry. Why hasn't anyone found them yet? Don't people know they're missing? The reality is starting to sink in. Maybe nobody knows. Maybe no one's looking. Maybe they're going to die out here. But they push those thoughts away. Rescue will come tomorrow. It has to. Day 2, July 31st. The sun rises again. More men have died during the night. From injuries, from shark attacks, from drinking seawater and swimming away in delirium. The groups are getting smaller. The survivors are weaker. The thirst is unbearable now. Men's lips are cracked and bleeding. Their tongues are swollen. Some are hallucinating even without drinking seawater. Dehydration causes its own hallucinations. Men think they see ships. They think they see islands. They think the Indianapolis is still afloat below them, and they can swim down and get water from the ship. These delusions kill dozens of men who swim away from the groups and drown or get attacked by sharks. The oil is another problem. When the Indianapolis sank, she leaked fuel oil into the water. The survivors are covered in it. It's in their eyes, their mouths, their noses. The fumes are nauseating. Some men are vomiting. The oil makes everything worse, and the sun is beating down. No shade, no relief, just floating in an oil slick in shark-infested water, getting weaker by the hour. Day 3, August 1st. Still no rescue. Men are dying faster now. The strong are getting weak. The weak are dying. Every few hours, someone in the group stops moving. They've died from dehydration or exhaustion, or they've just given up. The others have to let them go. Can't hold on to bodies. Need to conserve strength. So they push the dead away and watch them float off or sink. It's brutal. These were friends. Shipmates. Now they're just corpses floating in the ocean. The sharks are constant now, always circling, always watching. Men feel something brush against their legs and they panic. Is it a shark? Is this it? The attacks are random, unpredictable. A man will be there one moment and gone the next. Pulled under. A brief struggle. Maybe a scream. Then nothing. The water turns red. Then it clears. And the sharks move on to the next victim. It's nature being nature. But it feels like a nightmare. Like something from a horror story, except it's real and it's happening to them. Some men go insane. The combination of dehydration, sun exposure, salt poisoning, exhaustion, and fear breaks them. They start babbling. They attack other survivors thinking they're Japanese or sharks or demons. They have to be restrained. Or they swim away and die. Mental collapse is almost worse than physical death because you watch someone's mind disintegrate before they die, and you know it could happen to you, that you might be next to lose your mind. Day 4, August 2nd. Maybe 400 men are still alive out of the original 900 who survived the sinking. Over 500 have died in 3 days. And still no rescue. Nobody's looking for them. The Navy doesn't know they're missing. How is that possible? How does a ship sink and nobody notices? The answer is bureaucratic incompetence. The Indianapolis was scheduled to arrive at Leyte Gulf on July 31st. When she didn't arrive, nobody checked why. The port director at Leyte assumed she was delayed. Ships are often late. No big deal. The fact that she wasn't sending radio updates didn't concern anyone because she was under radio silence orders. So her silence was expected. And there was no system requiring ships to report safe arrival. If a ship didn't show up, the assumption was she'd arrive later. Nobody thought to verify. Nobody sent a search plane to look for her. The Indianapolis and her 900 survivors just fell through the cracks of Navy bureaucracy, and men were dying because of it. August 2nd, afternoon. A Navy PV-1 Ventura patrol bomber is flying a routine anti-submarine patrol north of Palau. The pilot, Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn, spots something in the water. An oil slick. That's odd. He decides to investigate. He follows the oil slick. Then he sees something else. Men in the water. Lots of them. His crew can't believe it. There are hundreds of men floating in the ocean. Who are they? Why are they there? Gwynn radios the sighting immediately. Men in the water. Unknown ship sunk. Need rescue immediately. He drops life rafts and supplies. Then he continues circling to mark the location for rescue ships. The Navy scrambles to respond. Ships and aircraft are dispatched to the location. But it takes time. Hours. The survivors have been in the water for over 4 days now. They see the aircraft overhead. They see the supplies being dropped. They know rescue is finally coming. Some cry, some pray. Some are too weak to react. They just float and wait, waiting to see if they'll be rescued before they die. The first rescue ship arrives in the evening of August 2nd. The USS Cecil J. Doyle, a destroyer escort. The crew begins pulling men from the water. It's nighttime by now. Dark. Difficult to see. But they work through the night. They have searchlights illuminating the water. They're calling out, looking for survivors, pulling men onto the ship. More ships arrive, more aircraft. The rescue operation expands. Through the night and into August 3rd, they search the area. They find men scattered over miles, small groups still together, individual men floating alone, corpses, lots of corpses. The ocean is full of bodies, men who almost made it but died hours before rescue arrived. By August 3rd, the rescue is complete. They've found everyone still alive. The final count: 316 survivors out of 1,196 men who were on the ship. 880 dead. Most of those who died were in the water. About 300 went down with the ship. But 580 died over 4 days floating in the ocean. From dehydration, from exposure, from shark attacks, from giving up and drowning, from drinking seawater and going insane, from injuries that became infected, from exhaustion, from the simple fact that the human body can only take so much, and they were pushed past that limit. The survivors are taken to hospitals. They're emaciated, dehydrated, burned from the sun, covered in oil. Some are delirious, others are catatonic. They've been through hell, literally days in shark-infested water watching friends die. That kind of trauma doesn't heal quickly. Some will deal with it for the rest of their lives. Nightmares, flashbacks, fear of water, survivors' guilt, wondering why they lived when others died. But the Navy isn't focused on helping the survivors recover. The Navy is focused on covering up the disaster. Because this is embarrassing. A major warship was sunk, and nobody noticed for 4 days. 880 men died because of bureaucratic incompetence. Someone needs to be held accountable, and the Navy decides that someone is Captain McVay. They're going to court-martial him for losing his ship. Make him the scapegoat. Blame him instead of acknowledging their own failures. And that decision is about to destroy the last surviving life from the USS Indianapolis. Captain Charles McVay is one of 316 survivors pulled from the water. He's been floating for 4 days like everyone else. He watched his ship sink. He watched his men die. He tried to keep groups together. He did everything he could. And now he's being told he's going to be court-martialed. The only captain in U.S. naval history to be tried for losing a ship in combat. The Navy needs someone to blame, and they've chosen him. What's about to happen is a miscarriage of justice so blatant that it will haunt the survivors for decades and eventually drive McVay to suicide. This is the story of how the Navy destroyed one of their own officers to avoid taking responsibility for their own catastrophic failure. August 1945. The war ends. Japan surrenders after atomic bombs are dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bombs that the Indianapolis delivered components for. The mission was successful. Those bombs helped end the war. But 880 men from the Indianapolis died. And the Navy wants answers. Or more accurately, the Navy wants scapegoats. Because admitting that their own bureaucratic failures led to 880 deaths is unacceptable. Easier to blame the captain. In September 1945, the Navy convenes a court of inquiry. This is standard procedure after any major disaster. The court is supposed to investigate what happened and determine if anyone was at fault. Captain McVay testifies. He explains the circumstances. He was sailing alone without escorts, even though he'd asked for them. He wasn't informed about Japanese submarine activity in the area. He made the decision not to zigzag on the night of July 30th because visibility was poor, and zigzagging in poor visibility is difficult and potentially dangerous. The torpedoes hit so suddenly there was no time to react. The ship sank in 12 minutes. No distress signal could be sent because the radio was destroyed. He did everything he could to save his men. The court hears testimony from survivors. They support McVay. They say he was a good captain, that he made reasonable decisions given the information he had, that the sinking wasn't his fault, that losing 880 men was a tragedy, but not because of McVay's actions. The real culpability lies with the Navy for not providing escorts, not sharing intelligence about submarine threats, and not noticing when the ship failed to arrive at its destination. But the court ignores this. They recommend court-martial charges against McVay. 2 charges. First, hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag. Second, failing to give timely orders to abandon ship. These charges are absurd. The first charge ignores the fact that zigzagging was at the captain's discretion and that even the Japanese submarine commander later said zigzagging wouldn't have prevented the attack. The second charge ignores the fact that the ship sank in 12 minutes and communications were destroyed, making it impossible to give timely orders to everyone. The recommendation goes up the chain of command. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal reviews it. He has the power to dismiss the charges, to acknowledge that McVay did nothing wrong, that the real failure was systemic. But Forrestal approves the court-martial. The trial is set for December 1945. The decision to court-martial McVay shocks the survivors. They know it's wrong. They write letters supporting their captain. They offer to testify on his behalf. Some are so angry they're talking to reporters. The Navy tells them to shut up. This is a military matter. Civilians don't get to have opinions about courts-martial. But the survivors won't be silenced. They know McVay is being railroaded. December 1945. The court-martial begins. McVay is charged with hazarding his ship and failing to abandon ship in a timely manner. The prosecution's case is weak. They're arguing that McVay should have been zigzagging. They call expert witnesses who testify that zigzagging is standard anti-submarine procedure. But the defense counters that McVay's orders gave him discretion. That visibility was poor that night. That zigzagging in poor visibility is controversial among naval commanders. It's not a clear-cut issue. Then the prosecution does something unprecedented. They called the Japanese submarine commander, Mochitsura Hashimoto, as a witness. They bring the man who actually sank the Indianapolis to the United States to testify against McVay. This has never been done before. Calling an enemy combatant to testify against an American officer in a war crimes context is one thing, but calling him to testify that an American captain was at fault for being successfully attacked? That's insane. It's the Navy admitting they can't make their case without help from the enemy. Hashimoto testifies. He describes the attack. He says the Indianapolis was an easy target because she wasn't zigzagging. But then, under cross-examination, he admits something crucial. He says that even if the Indianapolis had been zigzagging, he still would have sunk her. He had 6 torpedoes. He would have fired more torpedoes and adjusted his calculations. Zigzagging makes it harder to hit a target, but not impossible. A skilled submarine commander can still succeed. And Hashimoto was skilled. He would have sunk the Indianapolis regardless of what McVay did. This testimony should end the trial. The enemy commander himself is saying McVay's actions didn't matter. He was going to sink the ship either way. But the prosecution ignores this. They focus on the fact that not zigzagging made the attack easier. They argue McVay should have done everything possible to avoid being hit, even if it ultimately wouldn't have prevented the sinking. The second charge, failing to abandon ship in a timely manner, is even weaker. The ship sank in 12 minutes. Communications were destroyed. McVay gave the abandon ship order as soon as he realized the ship was doomed. But many crew members never received the order because there was no way to communicate with them. The prosecution argues he should have anticipated this, should have had better emergency procedures, should have acted faster. But these arguments ignore reality. When a ship is sinking that fast, with power out and communications destroyed, there's only so much a captain can do. The defense calls survivors to testify. They say McVay did everything possible, that the situation was chaotic, that men trapped below decks couldn't have been saved no matter how quickly the abandon ship order was given. That McVay was the last to leave the ship, as a captain should be, that he helped men in the water, that he kept groups together, that he demonstrated leadership throughout the ordeal. But the court isn't interested in exonerating McVay. The court wants a conviction, because the alternative is admitting the Navy failed, that they sent a ship into dangerous waters without escorts, that they didn't share intelligence about submarine threats, that they had no system to track whether ships arrived safely, that they didn't notice a major warship was missing for 4 days, that 580 men died in the water while nobody was looking for them. Admitting all of that is unacceptable. So they convict McVay. December 19th, 1945. The verdict: guilty of hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag, not guilty of failing to abandon ship in a timely manner. The sentence: loss of 100 numbers in seniority. This effectively ends his career. He'll never be promoted again. He'll always be the captain who lost his ship. The conviction is a permanent stain. But there's immediate controversy. The survivors are outraged. They petition the Navy to overturn the conviction. They write to newspapers. They organize. They're saying publicly what everyone knows privately. McVay is a scapegoat. The real culpability lies with the Navy brass, who created the conditions that led to the disaster. But the Navy doesn't care. The conviction stands. Secretary Forrestal reviews the case. He has the power to overturn the conviction or reduce the sentence. He decides to remit the sentence, meaning McVay won't lose seniority. He'll be allowed to continue his career, but the conviction remains on his record. Forrestal is trying to split the difference. Convict McVay to satisfy the need for accountability, but don't completely destroy his career. It's a political compromise that satisfies nobody and doesn't address the fundamental injustice. McVay continues serving in the Navy, but his career is effectively over. The conviction follows him everywhere. Other officers know what happened. Some sympathize. Others think he got what he deserved. McVay is isolated. He's the only captain court-martialed for losing a ship to enemy action. That distinction makes him a pariah. He retires in 1949 with the rank of Rear Admiral. The promotion to Admiral on retirement is standard practice. It doesn't erase the conviction. After retirement, McVay tries to live a normal life, but it's impossible. He receives hate mail, letters from relatives of men who died on the Indianapolis. They blame him. They say he murdered their sons, or brothers, or fathers. Every Christmas, every anniversary of the sinking, the letters arrive. Vicious letters saying he should have died instead. That he's a coward. That he should kill himself. The letters are brutal, relentless, and they come year after year. McVay tries to cope. He gives interviews occasionally, defending his actions. He stays in touch with some survivors. They support him. They know he's not responsible. But their support can't erase the conviction or stop the hate mail. McVay is carrying a burden that's crushing him. Survivors' guilt, the weight of 880 deaths, the injustice of the conviction, the hate mail. It's too much. November 6th, 1968. McVay is 70 years old. He's at his home in Connecticut. He's alone. His wife is away. He goes out to the front lawn. He's carrying his Navy service revolver. He sits down. He puts the gun to his head. He pulls the trigger. Charles Butler McVay III, captain of the USS Indianapolis, survivor of 4 days in the ocean, scapegoat for the Navy's failures, is dead by his own hand. He couldn't live with the burden anymore. The court-martial killed him just as surely as if they'd executed him in 1945. It just took 23 years. The survivors are devastated. They know McVay's suicide is the final casualty of the Indianapolis disaster. They renew their efforts to clear his name. They want the conviction overturned. They want the Navy to admit McVay did nothing wrong. But the Navy stonewalls. The conviction was legally proper, they say. The court-martial was conducted according to regulations. There's no basis to overturn it. The survivors are told to let it go. The case is closed. McVay is dead. Move on. But the survivors don't move on. They keep fighting. Through the 1970s and 1980s, they write letters, give interviews, lobby politicians. They want justice for their captain. Some of them dedicate their retirement years to this cause. They're not going to let McVay be remembered as the captain who lost his ship through incompetence. They know the truth, and they're determined that history will know it too. One survivor in particular becomes the leader of this effort, Giles McCoy. He was a young Marine private when the Indianapolis sank. He survived 4 days in the water. He watched men die. He testified at McVay's court-martial, supporting him. After the war, McCoy had a successful career, but he never forgot the Indianapolis, never forgot McVay, and he dedicated himself to clearing McVay's name. McCoy writes a book about the Indianapolis disaster. He gives lectures, he appears in documentaries. He's keeping the story alive, and he's making the case that McVay was railroaded, that the court-martial was unjust, that the Navy needs to acknowledge this. But the Navy won't budge. Admitting the court-martial was wrong would open questions about why it happened, about who was really responsible, about the bureaucratic failures that led to 880 deaths. The Navy would rather let McVay's reputation remain tarnished than admit their own culpability. In the 1990s, something unexpected happens. A 12-year-old boy in Florida named Hunter Scott is assigned a school project. He's supposed to research a historical topic. He's seen the movie Jaws and remembers the scene where the character Quint talks about the USS Indianapolis. Scott decides to research the actual disaster. He starts reading books, watching documentaries, and he learns about Captain McVay, about the court-martial, about the injustice. And this kid, this 12-year-old, decides he's going to do something about it. Hunter Scott starts interviewing Indianapolis survivors. He tracks them down, he writes letters, he calls them, he records their stories, and every single one tells him the same thing. McVay was a good captain. The court-martial was wrong. The Navy scapegoated him. Scott's school project turns into something bigger. He's collecting evidence, building a case, and he's getting media attention. A kid fighting for justice for a dead Navy captain is a good story. Local news covers it. Then national news. Suddenly people who never heard of the Indianapolis are learning about the disaster and the unjust court-martial. Scott presents his findings to Congress. He's testified before congressional committees. A middle school student arguing naval history to politicians. It's extraordinary. And it's effective. Because Scott isn't just arguing history. He has survivors backing him up, living witnesses saying the Navy was wrong. That's powerful testimony. Congress starts asking questions. Why was McVay court-martialed? Why haven't previous efforts to clear his name succeeded? What is the Navy hiding? The Navy is forced to respond. They review the case again. And finally, in 2000, Congress passes a resolution. It's not an official exoneration, but it states that Captain McVay's court-martial record should reflect that he is exonerated for the loss of the USS Indianapolis, that his conviction was unjust, that he was scapegoated. It's not everything the survivors wanted. The conviction still technically stands, but it's official acknowledgement that McVay did nothing wrong. In October 2000, Secretary of the Navy Richard Danzig issues a statement. He says the conviction was morally and legally improper, that McVay was unfairly court-martialed, that his actions were not responsible for the loss of the ship. It's the closest thing to an official apology the survivors will get. And it comes 32 years after McVay's suicide. Too late for him to know he's been vindicated, but meaningful to the survivors who fought so hard for this moment. Giles McCoy lives to see the exoneration. He's in his 70s by then. He's spent decades fighting for this, and he finally wins. McVay's name is cleared. The survivors can tell their captain's story, knowing that history will record the truth. McCoy dies in 2005, knowing he kept his promise to his captain. Hunter Scott, the kid who started all this, grows up to join the Navy himself. He becomes an officer. He serves on submarines, ironically, the same type of vessel that sank the Indianapolis. And he's always aware of the Indianapolis legacy, that his childhood project led to a captain being exonerated. That's a remarkable achievement for anyone, let alone someone who was 12 years old when he started. But let's talk about what the survivors actually went through, because the court-martial and the fight for exoneration are part of the story. But the real story is what those 316 men endured and how it affected them for the rest of their lives. The survivors came home in 1945 as heroes. The Indianapolis had delivered the atomic bomb components. The war was won. They were celebrated. But most of them didn't want to talk about it. What they'd experienced in the water was too traumatic. Watching friends die. The sharks, the hallucinations from dehydration, the sheer helplessness of floating in the ocean for 4 days knowing nobody was looking for them. That's not something you share at dinner parties. Many suffered from what we now call PTSD. Back then, they just called it being jumpy or having nightmares. Some couldn't swim anymore, couldn't even look at the ocean. Some had panic attacks in the shower because the water reminded them of floating in the Pacific. Some drank heavily to forget. Some withdrew from their families, unable to connect emotionally because part of them was still in the water. The guilt was overwhelming for many survivors. Why did they live when others died? What made them special? Was it luck? Skill? Divine intervention? Or just random chance? The survivors replayed those 4 days endlessly in their minds, wondering if they could have done something differently, saved one more person, made better decisions. The rational part knew they did everything they could, but the emotional part kept questioning. Some survivors made peace with it. They acknowledged the trauma, processed it as best they could, and moved forward. They had families, careers, normal lives. The Indianapolis was always there in the background, but it didn't define them. Others never found peace. The trauma defined their entire post-war lives. Relationships fell apart. Careers stalled. Some ended up alcoholics or depressed or unable to function in civilian life. And there was anger. Anger at the Navy for failing to notice they were missing. Anger at the bureaucracy that valued procedure over human lives. Anger that nobody was held accountable except McVay. Anger that the real culprits, the officers who failed to provide escorts or share intelligence or track the ship's arrival, faced no consequences. That anger sustained some survivors, gave them purpose. Fighting for McVay's exoneration gave them a mission, a way to channel the anger into something productive. The reunions helped. Starting in the 1960s, Indianapolis survivors began meeting annually. They'd gather, share stories, remember the fallen. These reunions were therapeutic. Being with people who understood what they'd been through, who didn't need explanations or context, who could look at each other and just know. That shared experience created bonds that lasted their whole lives. At the reunions, they'd do a roll call. All 1,196 names from the ship's manifest. For each name, someone would say whether that person survived or died. Where they died, if it was in the water. It took hours to go through all the names. But it was important. Nobody would be forgotten. Every man who served on the Indianapolis would be remembered. Even the ones whose families never knew the full story of how they died. The shark attacks became a particular point of focus in retellings of the disaster. Movies, documentaries, and books often sensationalize this aspect. The Indianapolis disaster is called the worst shark attack in history. And it's true that sharks killed many men. But the reality is more complicated. Most men who died in the water died from dehydration and exposure. The sharks were a constant terror, yes, but they weren't the primary killer. Still, the shark narrative dominates popular understanding because it's dramatic. Man versus nature, helpless sailors being picked off by predators. It makes for compelling storytelling even if it oversimplifies what actually happened. Some survivors resented the focus on sharks. They felt it diminished the real horror, which was being abandoned by their own navy, being left to die because of bureaucratic incompetence. The sharks were almost beside the point. The real enemy was the system that failed them. But the public wanted shark stories, so that's what they got. The actual numbers are disputed. Official Navy records say sharks killed perhaps 20 to 30 men. Survivor accounts suggest much higher numbers, maybe 100 to 150. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Distinguishing shark attacks from drownings from deaths by dehydration after 4 days in the water is impossible. Many men were taken by sharks. Many drowned. Many died of thirst. Some died from injuries sustained when the ship sank. The causes of death overlapped and are ultimately unknowable for most of the men who died in the water. What's certain is that the waiting was worse than the sharks. 4 days floating, getting weaker, watching the sun come up knowing you're still there. Still not rescued, still waiting. The psychological torture of hope being destroyed day after day. Every sunrise should have brought rescue. Every sunrise instead brought more death and more despair. That waiting, that slow degradation of hope, was perhaps the cruelest part. The men who kept their sanity longest were those who maintained structure, who organized their groups, who rationed the water and supplies that had been dropped, who looked after the injured, who maintained discipline. Leadership mattered in the water just as it did on the ship. The groups with natural leaders had better survival rates. The groups that descended into chaos, where men turned on each other or gave up en masse, lost more people. Captain McVay was one of those leaders. He kept his group together, maintained morale, made sure the injured got what little water they had. Never gave up. Never showed despair even though he must have felt it. The survivors who were with McVay in the water all said the same thing. He was a leader until the end, which makes his later court-martial and suicide even more tragic. He did everything right in the most extreme circumstances imaginable, and the Navy destroyed him anyway. After the exoneration in 2000, the Indianapolis survivors felt a sense of closure. Their captain's name was cleared. The historical record now reflected the truth, but many of them still struggled with survivors' guilt and trauma. Clearing McVay's name didn't bring back the 880 dead, didn't erase the memories of 4 days in the water, didn't make the nightmares stop. As the survivors aged and passed away, the mission became preserving the story, making sure future generations knew about the Indianapolis, about the sacrifice of 880 men. about the injustice done to Captain McVay, about the Navy's failures. The complete story, not just the dramatic parts about sharks and atomic bombs. In 2017, a team led by Paul Allen, the Microsoft co-founder, found the wreck of the Indianapolis. It's lying 18,000 feet down in the Philippine Sea. The discovery brought renewed attention to the story. The wreck is a war grave, the final resting place of 300 men who went down with the ship. It's protected by law. Nobody can disturb it or remove anything. The wreck belongs to the dead. But its discovery allowed for new research and new understanding of how the ship sank and where exactly it came to rest. The last Indianapolis survivor, Harold Bray, died in 2023 at age 99. With his death, there are no more living witnesses. The Indianapolis disaster has passed from living memory to history. Now it's up to books, documentaries, museums, and memorials to keep the story alive, to ensure that the 880 men who died aren't forgotten. That Captain McVay's vindication isn't lost to time, that the Navy's failures are remembered as lessons for future generations. The USS Indianapolis has a memorial in Indianapolis, Indiana, the city's namesake ship. The memorial lists all 1,196 men who were on board, survivors and dead. It's a place for families to visit, to remember, to honor. Similar memorials exist in other locations, physical spaces where the story lives on even after the last survivor is gone. The lessons from the Indianapolis disaster are numerous. First, bureaucracy kills. The failure to notice a missing ship, the lack of systems to track vessel arrivals, the compartmentalization of intelligence that prevented McVay from knowing about submarine threats. All of these were bureaucratic failures that had deadly consequences. The military learned from this, implemented better tracking systems, better intelligence sharing. But those lessons came too late for the 880 men who died. Second, scapegoating is cowardly. The Navy needed someone to blame. Instead of acknowledging systemic failures, they blamed one man. This protected the institution at the expense of an individual. It's a pattern that repeats throughout history. Organizations protect themselves by sacrificing individuals. McVay's court-martial was unjust, not just because he didn't deserve to be convicted, but because the real culprits were never held accountable. Third, survivor advocacy matters. The Indianapolis survivors fought for decades to clear McVay's name. They refused to let the injustice stand. And eventually, they won. Not in time to help McVay, but in time to set the historical record straight. Their persistence is a lesson in never giving up on what's right, even when institutions refuse to acknowledge wrongdoing. Fourth, war has costs beyond the battlefield. The 880 men who died from the Indianapolis sinking weren't killed in combat against a visible enemy. They were killed by a combination of enemy action and friendly negligence. They died because their own military failed to protect them and failed to notice they were missing. Those deaths are just as much war casualties as any soldier killed in direct combat. But they're often forgotten because they don't fit the narrative of heroic combat death. The Indianapolis story is uniquely tragic because it combines so many failures. The ship delivered components for the atomic bomb that ended the war. That mission was successful. But then the Navy failed the crew at every turn, failed to provide escorts, failed to share intelligence, failed to notice they were missing, failed to rescue them in time, failed to acknowledge their own culpability. And then, as a final insult, failed to support their captain and drove him to suicide. It's a cascade of institutional failure that killed 880 men and destroyed the one man who might have saved more if he'd been given the resources and support he deserved. The survivors carried this knowledge for their entire lives. They knew their friends died needlessly, that better systems, better communication, better oversight would have saved hundreds of lives. That knowledge is a burden. Understanding that death was preventable, but wasn't prevented because of incompetence and indifference. That's harder to accept than death from enemy action in combat. But through it all, the survivors maintained their dignity and their mission. They told their stories when asked. They supported each other through reunions and correspondence. They fought for their captain's exoneration. They ensured their shipmates wouldn't be forgotten. They turned their trauma into a mission to preserve memory and seek justice. That's remarkable. That's heroism of a different kind than combat heroism. It's the heroism of persistence, of refusing to let injustice stand, of keeping faith with the dead. The USS Indianapolis remains one of the most famous ship sinkings in naval history, famous for the atomic bomb mission, famous for the shark attacks, famous for being forgotten by the Navy for 4 days, famous for Captain McVay's unjust court-martial. All of these elements combine into a story that's both inspiring and infuriating. Inspiring because of the men who survived impossible conditions, infuriating because of the injustice and incompetence that put them in those conditions and then blamed the wrong person. If you remember nothing else from this story, remember this. 1,196 men served on the USS Indianapolis. 880 of them died. Most of those deaths were preventable. The man blamed for the disaster, Captain Charles McVay, was innocent and was vindicated 55 years too late. The survivors spent their lives fighting for truth and justice. And the lessons from this disaster should never be forgotten, because the cost of forgetting is measured in human lives. The ship the Navy forgot, the men who survived the impossible, the captain who was scapegoated, the survivors who fought for justice. The story of the USS Indianapolis is all of these things. It's a story that needs to be told, remembered, and honored, not just for the drama of shark attacks or atomic bombs, but for the human beings at the center of it. The 1,196 men who served, the 316 who survived, and the one captain who did his duty and was destroyed for it anyway. Remember the Indianapolis. Remember her crew. Remember what they endured. Remember the injustice done to their captain. Remember the lessons. Because forgetting means those 880 men died for nothing, and they deserve better than that.